Here's Robert.
Between my producer, Don, and all my friends on Facebook, I get loaded up with some pretty interesting stories from time to time, and people are getting wind of my perspective on a lot of different things here, including the controversy of the so-called AIDS syndrome, which is not a disease, and its relationship or non-relationship to what they call HIV. And Patrick sent a link yesterday. It was similar to the time that my producer sent a link. Maybe I've got multiple producers out there. He says, Robert, I hate to get you all worked up and angry, but I had to pass this story on to you since I know how you feel about this HIV/AIDS. And, of course, the story is what? AIDS drugs can stop heterosexual infection. And I'm thinking, wow, they've really engineered a doozy with this one, because this is the first pill on record in the history of recorded medical science or pseudoscience that a pill knows whether you're heterosexual or homosexual. It is as bizarre gets, and I thought, who can I have on to discuss this and more but a dear friend who I've known for many years who's stood up for justice and, of course, against scientific, how would we say, injustice. And his name is Clark Baker, and he's got a website called the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice, OMSJ. And the headline on that site is How Drug Companies Get Away with Murder, because this certainly is, if they want to drug all heterosexuals now. It wasn't enough to go after gay people or other minorities or poor people. Now everybody needs to be on this pill. Clark Baker, welcome to the Robert Scott Bell Show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm honored to have you back on board. You have stood up for so much that is right and good. I've gone through your history out with my show over the years on Sundays that I've been doing for a long time. But now that we're daily through Natural News Radio, maybe many don't know you yet. I wish they would. And the things that you've done, of course, as a Marine, a U.S. Marine, as a part of the Los Angeles Police Department as well. You have rifled through corruption, not literally, but maybe literally, and been thrown out and then cleared because you were actually standing against corruption, and this happens from time to time. But you've actually stood against so much injustice, it's hard to imagine how you can't go out without a flak jacket.
Well, after you've arrested a few thousand felons during a career, you kind of get used to them not liking you very much. And when you consider that the pharmaceutical industry has paid about $9 billion settling thousands of criminal and civil complaints related to their products that kill or injure about 1 million Americans a year, I'm not surprised that they don't like me either.
Yes,
but it's just part of the territory. And if I wanted to make cookies, then I would make cookies instead.
Well, you would make cookies that would bring about justice and peace, though. That's just your nature.
No, actually, I just like chocolate chips. That's all.
All right. Well, if that would make people happy and more justice in the world, then we'll go with it. But
there you go.
But seriously, this is something that is you're not alone in this, and we know that there's a growing movement on to point out the dangerous absurdities. And if there ever was one, I mean, this story about pills that know whether you're a heterosexual or not is absurd as it gets. But it just piles on the absurdities of the whole HIV equals AIDS dogma, which was never actually proven. But, that's another part of this story.
Well, this is just another story on the absurdity that began in 1984 when Robert Gallo suggested or declared that HIV is what causes AIDS. You figure that since virologists who study HIV have identified that this thing really targets primarily homosexuals and not heterosexuals, that since the virus can target homosexuals, then certainly we can create drugs that will protect heterosexuals from a virus that is so sophisticated.
It's like a super villain that Ian Fleming couldn't have even come up with in Spectre and James Bond movies.
Well, it is fantasy, and there is no superlative for bizarre. I mean, you can't add more to this to make it sound even more bizarre. The fact is that Joseph Sonnabend on OMSJ, I think since the time that we last spoke, OMSJ is a licensed investigative agency in California, and we're based in Los Angeles, and we're also now a 501c3 nonprofit agency. And we're juggling about 50 active criminal, civil, and military HIV-related cases throughout the United States. And since we last spoke, I think in the last 20 months, we have forced prosecutors to either drop all HIV-related criminal charges, or significantly reduce the charges against criminal defendants who are facing 20, 30, 50 years in state prison if they're found guilty.
Clark, this is stunning news, and I want to make sure everybody understands what you're saying here. We have in the so-called criminal justice system, for which there might not be a lot of justice, but there's a lot of criminality, we might have the issue of, or we actually do have, where people are prosecuted based on whether they have this so-called status of being HIV positive or not. Now, I've covered this within my media outreach for, ever since I've been on the radio starting in 1999. About the fact that, I questioned the whole paradigm and causation of the so-called AIDS syndrome, and that HIV could not, even if it was real, do what they say it does. Now, based on the test that is known to not even detect the presence or absence of this HIV, or it cannot be utilized as a definitive, let's say, diagnostic tool to say you have AIDS or you don't have AIDS, they have been able to charge, prosecute, and convict many people over the years for, maybe they call it attempted murder or assault, or I don't know. You tell me the terms here, because of their status, which is an imaginary status, because they may have had sexual relations, intimate relationships with another person, and then they say, well, that could kill them, based on non-science. And so you have been able to bring, if I'm correct here, you have been able to bring to the criminal justice system the fact that there's not enough evidence to say that there's even a causative link, that they've had to drop or reduce those charges?
That's pretty much it. The reason criminal, when I first got involved in this, I had a bunch of MDs and PhDs who are shills for the pharmaceutical industry tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. After all, I'm not a virologist. How would I know? And they would refuse to answer my questions. So I figure if we get involved in criminal cases, we can force prosecutors to prove that HIV tests detect HIV, and we can force prosecutors to prove that HIV attacks cells and causes AIDS.
Clark, this is freaking brilliant. What you're telling me here and what you've done is absolutely brilliant. Taking it out of the corrupted cage of pseudoscience and pharmaceutically corrupted science, which we argue, and our good friend Liam Scheff calls it scientism, the religion or cult of science, into a realm where they actually have to analyze the facts, not just hearsay and not just intimidation based on somebody's degree or not.
Everything that you have heard about HIV and AIDS has been propaganda. Everything. And so I no longer ask MDs and PhDs about HIV or AIDS unless they're being deposed by my team.
Nice.
And in every single case where we have forced these experts to testify honestly, we have either forced them to admit that they don't know what they're talking about, or we basically impeach them. And last September, we're involved in a case a civil case where we deposed a 30-year infectious disease expert who has all the curriculum vitae, all that stuff, to impress juries and lawyers and courts.
Yes.
But whenever we ask them the questions, and we know the theology better than they do, they end up admitting they don't know what they're talking about.
Wow.
We had a case in Indiana where we deposed the director of the Department of Health for the state of Indiana on a case where her testimony would lead to sending a factually innocent man to prison for 27 years. And within an hour, she admitted that she knew nothing about HIV tests or diagnosis. And this is the prosecution's lead expert witness in an HIV case who is in charge of HIV policy for the entire state of Indiana.
I bet they didn't see that coming.
No, we left them looking for other things to charge him with, and the case is still active. But we have, so far, in the past 3 years since I've been involved in HIV, we have not found one single expert who can competently testify under oath under penalty of perjury. When we get them in court, They recoil like vampires in church.
Wow. Hey, does Robert Gallo, does he have wind of this? He could be very nervous right now.
Well, actually, Robert Gallo received a subpoena on one of our cases as well last year, and as did Sam Broder, who was behind the AZT debacle in the 80s. And both of them basically forwarded their subpoenas to the NIH. The NIH stonewalls such subpoenas. They won't listen to state subpoenas. They just simply ignore them. And it costs so much time and energy that we basically learned, and in our future subpoenas to them, they will be federal subpoenas.
Nice.
And the federal courts don't let the NIH ignore such subpoenas.
Oh, that's sensational. And you know, it reminds me of a case of, what's his name, Tommy Morrison, the professional boxer. He was in one of the Rocky movies with Sylvester Stallone. I think he played the part of Tommy Gunn. He supposedly tested HIV positive, I believe in the 90s, and it ended his career. And he is desperately trying to get back in the ring because he's as healthy as a horse. He's not doing any of the drugs. And he's written continual letters and letters to Robert Gallo, to anybody, to say, hey, where's the evidence that the tests show that I have this thing that you claim I have? And so here's another case of a man's life, you know, ruined, although there have been more that have been ruined to death because they become so frightened of the status that they may drug themselves to death.
This is why we're involved in these cases. There is no other investigative agency, and I created OMSJ for this reason, and OMSJ being the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice. I founded the organization as a retired LAPD officer because I discovered, when I was collecting evidence related to this stuff, I discovered that there were no local, state, or federal law enforcement agencies that were interested in or willing to investigate any of this. So this is, and even before we got involved, the arguments have always occurred on the battlefield of propaganda.
Right, yeah.
And since the pharmaceutical industry has a much bigger arsenal of weapons to use in a propaganda war, it's impossible to win such a war
on their terrain.
Propaganda.
Yeah, and on their terrain. You're right. This is why this is so brilliant what you've done. Listen, we need to take a break. Clark Baker's going to hang around with me another segment here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. He is at omsj.org, and you're going to check that out. I've got the links up at robertscottbell.com. We're putting a banner up as well to those that are wrongly accused, so to speak. And we'll talk about a little bit more about the whole syndrome of AIDS, the corruption of Big Pharma, as well as what you can do to help out in this regard to set the record straight.
The Robert Scott Bell Show.
We are back and hitting a very intense and very important topic here on the Robert Scott Bell Show today. Clark Baker is my guest. omsj.org is the website, and I have it linked up at the Robert Scott Bell Show website as well at robertscottbell.com. OMSJ stands for Office of Medical and Scientific Justice. And, of course, Clark Baker, Marine and retired LAPD police officer, as we say, and really a guy that stands up for those that have been basically wronged and really stands for justice. And justice is everybody getting what they deserve. And it doesn't mean that, criminals aren't criminals or bad guys aren't bad guys, but certainly when you go after people that have done wrong, you want to make sure that what you're accusing them of is very real. And, of course, in context of the whole HIV paradigm, we recognize that the HIV itself may not be very real. And I'm working on some interviews as well and following up with some further revelations out of the House of Numbers documentary film. There's a lot of unaired footage that is coming out soon, and it's going to go to the very point in the heart of the matter that these scientists can't even agree on. Not only the tests are bad, that was in the movie, but has it ever been isolated, HIV? So the tests, of course, are completely bogus. So how do you convict somebody based on a test like that? That's where Clark Baker comes in and says, no. Now, we would both acknowledge that there is a very real thing that is immune deficiency, immune collapse. Those are real disorders, real problems. But being caused by the retrovirus that may or may not even be isolated, nor ever caught in the act of doing anything, that's a whole separate issue. But it is the issue we're tackling right now with Clark Baker. Thanks for hanging in there, Clark.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm trying to relate this as clearly as possible, especially for my new listeners, because this is stunning information to consider, almost too much. But the fact is, you're going in there and in the court of law, which is a different terrain or milieu than the pharmaceutical propagandists can operate. They can no longer operate. Have you been able to get any of these so-called depositions or testimonies on video? Because that would make a fascinating documentary as well.
Well, we have 2 depositions on video so far, and we're planning, and we have other depositions that are strictly by transcript. And after these cases are resolved, we will know whether or not we can present the video. And yes, they will be interesting. In the coming months and years, we've got a number of trials that will be coming up, and we expect that at least one of those we will be able to videotape so that the world can see what an esteemed HIV expert actually looks like when he's telling the truth.
Yeah, that's got to be uncomfortable for them.
Yes, very much so. But the concept of what we do is actually quite simple, because if you think about a drunk driving arrest,
yes,
if I arrest, let's say I arrest you for drunk driving, and this is obviously a hypothetical.
Yeah, this is the guy who barely can hold, let's say, a non-alcoholic beer.
Well, you're a good candidate then, because it would only require 1 or 2 beers.
Not even a quarter of a beer, I'll be tipsy. So yes, you got me. All right, officer. Honest, officer, I just a quarter of a beer. Okay, go ahead.
So I drive down the street, and I see you driving badly, and I have to. I have to develop enough probable cause. You have to make enough mistakes to where I can pull you over. And then when I pull you over, I walk up to the side of the vehicle and I see all kinds of symptoms like red, watery eyes, and I smell alcoholic beverage coming from you. And I ask for your driver license, and you've got poor coordination. And I have to go through a field sobriety test whereby I not only diagnose you as a police officer for being under the influence of alcohol and unable to drive a motor vehicle, I also have to rule out all of the other things that could cause you to be behaving this way. If you're going through diabetic shock, the last thing I want to do is arrest you for drunk driving. So I have to actually conduct a diagnosis of you in order to establish whether you're intoxicated or not.
Well, that seems like reasonable. As you say, you got reasonable or probable cause, then you've got to go further to establish evidence of some kind that would be admissible, I guess, and defensible in a court of law. And I guess if I said, honest officer, it was just my homeopathic remedy, that might not fly.
It probably wouldn't unless I could, if I could rule that out, it will not fly. Mm-hmm. And but with HIV, there is no such standard. With HIV, you basically have a test that the manufacturers all indicate cannot be used for diagnostic purposes, and the test is being reviewed by a doctor who typically does not know how to diagnose HIV. So it's typical, and not only that, but the doctor who testifies is typically not the doctor who made the alleged diagnosis. So this would be like you being arrested for drunk driving by me, and 4 or 5 years later, my chief of police gets on the stand and declares you were drunk because of what he reads in the arrest report. That would never fly for a misdemeanor drunk driving that could put you in jail for 10 days. So why should that put you in jail for 50 years if you're allegedly HIV positive with similar minimal evidence?
Well, it's far too reasonable to say it that way. And, of course, even people that have dealt with traffic violations, if they go to court and the officer that gave them the citation doesn't show up, they typically have to dismiss it, do they not?
That's correct. Now, in a felony case, even if it's a felony case like murder, you still need witnesses. You need continuity of evidence. If you're going to do a blood test on a criminal defendant, you have to establish who drew the blood, how the blood was packaged, where it was transported. This is all continuity of evidence. Who received the package, who tested it, and so forth.
Right.
But with HIV, none of that exists.
Now, I got to ask you, this would make phenomenal courtroom drama in a fictionalized account, even though this is, truth is stranger than fiction. This is going on in real life, and you've witnessed this. Are the judges absolutely turning white as a ghost? Are they going, wow, do they even know how to respond to this?
So far, we haven't even had to present this before more than one judge, because as soon as the prosecutors are aware of what we've done, they typically reduce the charges. And our first case is probably the most is a great example of this. A lady was facing 30 years in state prison in Florida. She was facing 30 years in state prison for exposing 4 men to HIV. We collected the medical and scientific evidence that prosecutors plan to use against her. We had one of our scientists examine the evidence and produce a signed, sworn affidavit about his opinions. Based upon that opinion, defense counsel filed a motion to dismiss, and based upon that motion to dismiss and our affidavit, the prosecutors reduced their initial offer of 15 years in state prison to 5 days of unsupervised probation for disturbing the peace.
Wow. This is astonishing. I got to reiterate, this is like the play-by-play here, and I got to go back and reiterate what has just transpired here. We're talking about people that are being accused of a crime based on something that can never be evidenced or proven, yet the assumptions have basically the court system just has been riding on these assumptions as if they were fact, because no one has challenged them in a way that basically dismantles the entire charge.
That's right, and the courts are not sophisticated enough. The prosecutors certainly aren't, but it's not up to them to really understand this stuff. They basically look for an expert to render an opinion. It's up to the defense counsel or the defense attorney to challenge the witness, the expert witness. When the typical defense attorney looks at a CV of an MD or a PhD, right, and starts, their heads roll, their eyes roll back, and they want to settle. When we are involved and we send one of our attorneys in to handle the direct or the cross-examination of one of these witnesses, our attorneys know the theology much better than these witnesses. And at that point, we can compel the witness to admit they don't know what they're talking about.
Well, it is absolutely stunning. Now, Clark, where does this go? Because eventually we've got to see this impacting on the scientific or pseudoscientific religion, if you will, out there in the world where propaganda rules and wins and science does not. How do you see this one day impacting that greater big picture where we don't start condemning people to death for retroviruses that may or may not even exist?
Well, one of the first things that happened, and I don't know if OMSJ was directly or indirectly involved in this, but shortly after we started winning cases, I think about 9 or 10 months after we started winning cases, the Obama administration sent out a recommendation to all the states, the United States, recommending that all HIV-related criminal prosecutions be stopped.
I don't know if that was a coincidence. I mean, that's pretty stunning reversal, despite the fact that, as we've seen the Obama administration continue on what Bush did and times 10 in many cases. So there may be, and I don't have evidence of it, but there may be a very direct relationship there.
There may be, but again, I'm an investigator, and until I see evidence of it, I can only mention the coincidence. But I think that eventually there will be a critical mass that will occur. We've got a number of cases, including one explosive case that's been in the news. KSN reported that out of Wichita earlier this year, where an Air Force veteran with 20 years of service in the Air Force has been reduced to airman, kicked out of the Air Force, and sent to Fort Leavenworth Prison for an 8-year sentence for exposing a bunch of people to HIV. We were involved in that case early on, before the trial ever took place, and the defense attorneys misled their own client.
Really?
Misrepresented how our involvement in the case, and they pretty much convinced their client to admit that he's HIV positive before the court without anyone ever establishing that he was actually HIV positive.
Well, and even maybe defining what that means or doesn't mean.
Exactly. The defendant's own physician testified against him in the trial as the prosecution expert witness, and just weeks after she testified, she received a $2.9 million grant from Bristol-Myers Squibb, which is the pharmaceutical company that makes the drug that she gave this defendant, while her own clinic established that he was completely asymptomatic the whole time.
In other words, he showed no signs of the overt expression of what they call AIDS. This is stunning. I mean, that is enough, I would say, I don't know if probable cause is the right thing, but certainly a suspicion that there's some criminal behavior behind the scenes here.
Well, Bristol-Myers Squibb right now is involved in a multi-state fraud investigation in which they're being accused of hundreds, if not thousands, of kickbacks to physicians, just like the one who testified against this defendant.
Of course, and they rely on the religion of HIV for billions, perhaps, of dollars of revenue, and how much in profits, I don't know. And, of course, this is a global issue, as we see with the pharmaceutical industrial complex, but it affects real people. It affects real lives. It terminates, it ends real lives. And so what you're doing is standing up for the defenseless, the people that didn't even know that they could be or should be defended because they assume that they're, quote-unquote, guilty.
You know, you've used the word theology a number of times, and what I've discovered is that one either believes that HIV attacks cells and causes AIDS, or they don't believe it. But when it comes to truth and evidence, when you take these cases into court, the evidence does not exist.
To show that it does anything.
To show that HIV attacks cells and causes AIDS, or that shows that doctors even know how to competently diagnose it. It just isn't there.
Well, these stunning revelations, I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg, Clark, and you've been at this for so many years, and I really appreciate you. You know that, and your friendship as well, and admire you immensely for your courage and tenacity, and it's just what you do. It's who you are, and I understand that. But like I said, big hugs to you for all the things that you're doing so much to help the people that need the help.
Thank you so much. And for anybody who has any other questions, just send them over to our website or visit your website, and we'll provide any answers that we can.
Well, yeah, we'll have the link up as well. So if you know somebody so-called wrongfully accused, I think was there a movie called Wrongfully Accused? This is something that is a very real issue that affects the lives, and not just those that are impacted directly, but family members that are wrongly, convinced of things that aren't real. So what we're doing here is talking about lifting the veil of illusion, seeing the harsh reality, waking everybody up in a very unique and creative and effective and efficient way. Clark Baker from the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice, thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, when we come back from this break, guess what? My dear friend Liam Scheff joins me to parse this story even further. How does this impact the rest of the world? How might it impact you or me or anybody? Bringing it out into the scientific realm and getting past the scientism.
It's the Robert Scott Bell Show.
My good friend Liam Scheff joins me now to wrap up today's program following Clark Baker's amazing revelations within the OMSJ and what they've done within the so-called courts of law about how they've basically shut down these vicious attacks, and we call them legalistic attacks, but basically claims and prosecutions of people that have been diagnosed by things that can't be diagnosed, at least according to the so-called standards where there are no standards. And we come back to this, Liam. I mean, the absurdity of this drug that knows whether you're heterosexual or not. I mean, that's a stunning thing that they've engineered here. I mean, Monsanto couldn't even do this.
Yeah, this has been in the works for a while. This is them trying to get out of the AIDS agenda. The AIDS agenda has been so powerfully and thoroughly revealed. The Internet is absolutely full of verifiable information about how fraudulent HIV tests are, how many things they come up positive for, the fact that they do not come up positive for any particular particle at all, and the fact that AIDS is any disease that occurs in anybody that you're saying is at risk for AIDS. It's a circular logical or a circular illogical definition. So AIDS is poverty, AIDS is major drug abuse, it depends on where you are. That has been so clarified and made lucid to the public through the work of David Crow and the Alberta Reappraising AIDS Society, through Rethinking AIDS, through my work, through the wonderful film House of Numbers, through the work of many, many researchers and scientists who have come out and said this is an absolute disgrace and a fraud, and we have to start treating people for immune deficiency and not for a phantom retrovirus.
Right, and I have to ask you, Liam, because, again, you've got that lineage within the scientific realm, the family members that have been in there. What do you think they're doing here? I mean, to me, this is like a wake-up call for people that are even asleep. They read let's say, an article or a headline that says, hey, this pill knows whether you're gay or straight. At that point, you got to go, even if you don't know anything about anything, you're like, well, that's a little weird. How does that happen? It kind of wakes up another layer here. Is this just like a last desperate attempt to sell drugs on the way out the door, or what?
They're now saying that healthy heterosexuals, and they're not looking at heterosexuals in Europe or North America. They're looking in Southeast Asia, the Asian market, can take a drug.
In Africa, too, right?
In Africa, of course, sorry.
Yeah.
That's de rigueur for them. They're always in Africa. They're always doing that ancient colonial dance over there.
Right.
So this is them saying, let's get more drugs into who? Poor heterosexuals. Because there is no heterosexual AIDS epidemic. There is only major poverty. So they want to spread it beyond the traditional market of Africa and gay men. So they're looking at Southeast Asia. And they say, if you take this drug, you can now have as much sex as you want, and you won't get what? You won't become HIV positive. Well, within their study, they had a secondary study, or maybe a primary study, in 3 countries in Africa with close to 4,000 people, which showed exactly the opposite. There was no benefit from drugging people with a black box fatality-inducing drug.
Yes.
That was a study, again, in 3 African nations. Now they're promoting a study with 1,200 people, or really 600 being on the drug, and then they say the one with 4,000 or 3,900 people in Africa. These studies, which show no benefit from the drug, they say must be false. In other words,
because there was more people in the study.
And no, they don't have any good reason. They just don't like the results. So they want to say that taking a drug reduces your chances of becoming HIV positive. You have to do special math to come up with that. Nevertheless, they then have a secondary study which says, no, actually that's not true. Now they're saying, well, we don't like the result of that study, so maybe, they're lying. There's no other way to say it. They're lying. Even within the confines of their own logic, they're lying. Taking deadly drugs does not improve your clinical health. And if you notice, and you read any of this gobbledygook that they put out, they don't mention, they're not concerned about clinical health. All they want to do is tell people, God, Robert, I don't know who they're selling this to. I mean, who's going to bite on this? Who's going to buy this?
Well, there's still some element of the global, let's say, cartels that fall for it within governments that are getting the paybacks, and then they can point to a study, ignore the larger study, and say, see, this is going to help you. And, of course, then they can go to their citizens and say, listen, we have to. It's humanitarian. We're going to take some money from you, and we're going to give it to the people of Africa, which is really not the people of Africa. It's Bristol-Myers Squibb and other of the global pharmaceutical elite, in order to poison the population of those continents and those areas. Now, this reminds me of the revelations coming out about, we covered this last week, vaccines being now considered cluster bombs, biological cluster bombs. On your site right now, liamscheff.com, I've got a link up on the blog at robertscottbell.com to this. You say, wait, don't vaccinate. And you have quite a powerful visual there about the CDC if they had to report honestly on vaccine injuries as well.
Yeah, that's an inversion of the CDC's promotion. If the CDC has hired an advertising company to create this clever little cartoon. It's a cartoon face. It looks like a little Asian girl. She seems to have some disease on one side, and that's the don't wait part. And then on the other side, she's perfectly healthy, and it says vaccinate. So I said, well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I turned it around and I said, wait, don't vaccinate, and turned the image around, and I put up some actual material data, which states that, citing 2000 data, and Clark Baker has this up on his site, OMSJ, citing 2000 data, you find that 17 people have a death attributed to whooping cough, but there are some 14,000 plus vaccine injuries and deaths from being vaccinated. So we've got really tiny numbers of people suffering from these things that we all have to be vaccinated against. And, 15,000 people suffering terribly from the vaccine.
Yeah,
we live in an era of absolute propaganda and fiction. I have a question. We're constantly inundated with this stuff. Drugs that are supposed to stop people from becoming HIV positive but don't. Tests that don't tell you if they're HIV positive. Vaccines which cause far more illness. I mean, tens of thousands of % more illness than the supposed illness they're trying to prevent. I'm going to follow your point. Who is this study for? Who is this heterosexuals should take deadly drugs study for? Because it's definitely not for people. It's not like people walk around going to their doctor saying, I'm terrified if I don't take a deadly drug, I'll someday test HIV positive.
You're right. It's a very good observation there. And that's why I brought up the idea that this is propaganda for governments to use. Because in this way, they can sell this idea of false charity, which we know it's nothing of the sort does government engage in, and then basically take money from the people and then basically convert it, if you will, up the line, so to speak, pharmaceutical welfare, corporatism. And in that way, the gravy train keeps rolling. And, of course, the government agents, which are not human in the real sense of the word, now are benefiting through the lobbying efforts. And, of course, all this revolves around and around. And then, of course, you know so well, and we've covered this over the years on the Robert Scott Bell Show, the revolving door between big pharma and big government. And this is true on a scale within the U.S., or we've seen evidence of it within the European countries as well as the international non-governmental organizations like the World Health Organization, who you liken to, when we were talking on the break, to if the WHO says it, it's like watching Harry Potter and say, well, Voldemort said so.
The Ministry of Information has released, whenever the WHO talks, how do you know the World Health Organization is lying? Because they're saying something. But I take your point. This isn't information for people. This is information for gatekeepers. This is for the Bill Gates of the world and the Bonos and the Oprahs and anybody else who gets on board with some cockamamie, let's circumcise and or drug and or do whatever else to all these poor people. They now take this totally phony study, which is contradicted within the confines of their own data. I mean, they're like children. This is going to dramatically reduce HIV infection. It didn't reduce HIV infection. Yay! They hear only what they want to hear that comes out of their mouth. And I guess it's these gatekeepers, these gatekeeping entities, the Gates Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, Bono, and the rest of the pop stars, Annie Lennox, who mistakenly or for whatever reason get on these things. Now they can take this and they can clamor for the rights of heterosexual Africans and Filipinos and Malaysians to be drugged with this stuff. I get it now. I get it.
Well, this is a great revelation right here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. If we got Liam to get it, man, oh man, I'm impressed, because Liam, in his own right, Liam, what I think about you, how I feel about you, and all the things, the revelations you've helped others to basically leap towards with some of the things you've done, whether it be your graphic artistry expertise or your ability to disseminate information and write it back out there. So grateful to really follow up on Clark Baker's couple of segments, because, again, this is overwhelming information for a lot of people to consider. And when they reveal these headlines that on one hand would be horrific, but on the other hand, I look at it very positively, say these people are losing. They have lost it. And now we know their strategy. This is where they're going to hang on just a little bit longer.
They want just the end of the market. They're looking for a new marketplace. And this is a tabloid. We've just interrupted a message going out to the people at the main at the main floor of the AIDS conference. That's what this is. This is the message for Bono and for Oprah. Now proselytize that heterosexuals have to take this drug. Poor heterosexuals. You'll never see it at University of California, Berkeley. You'll never see it at Harvard University in the dorms. You'll never see it in Beverly Hills. This is for the poor. We're going to see it now. That's what the purpose of all of this was. It's confusing because there's no science to it.
Yeah.
It's the worst kind of junk.
Well, everybody's going to have to digest that for another 24 hours till we crank up another edition of the Robert Scott Bell Show. Liam, once again, thank you for being a part of the show today as well. Thanks to my producer, Don. Thanks to Clark Baker and all of you out there listening every day. Spread the word. A lot of people still don't yet know of this message. And, of course, I've got Liam's site linked up, as well as the OMSJ, everything else I've talked about today at the blog at robertscottbell.com, as well as through naturalnewsradio.com. Put your email in there, and you'll get your daily updates with all the links so you can see through the news, be empowered to walk through with a lot less fear. Let's just call it like it is. And in the meantime, you know how I end this show, Liam? You want to end it?
The power to heal is Robert Scott Bell's? No, the power to heal is
yours. Thank you, Liam. Back tomorrow.
The Robert Scott Bell Show.